Hello, wellness students. Welcome to week 10 instruction. And hopefully, you've looked through this page in the module more carefully. Within this page, the way I have it set up is you'll see a TED Talk, then you'll see the lecture, and then beneath that, I've linked the PowerPoint presentation. So, what I'd like for you to be doing this week is watch the TED Talk first, then come to the lecture. And the same applies for the next lecture. Be sure, and especially with that one, be sure and watch the TED Talk first. Um, so, hopefully, you have all watched this first 12-minute TED Talk, the difference between healthy and unhealthy love. Um, I thought it did a really good job of presenting some of the characteristics of a healthy relationship and what that tends to look like in a relationship versus what it does not look like. So I thought it was a really great 12-minute, video. One thing I wanted to clarify from the get-go for this week's instruction is this word relationships. When I use this word, unless I specify otherwise, I'm talking about all types of relationships, relationship with friends, family members, it could be a relationship with a partner. A lot of the rules apply kind of across the board. And so that word relationship, think about it in a broad way versus just that more singular way of a relationship with a partner. So, with this particular lecture, I have, I don't know, 7 slides or so that have just a lot of characteristics listed. And what I'm going to be asking you to do is to be sure and pull up the PowerPoint and read all of the characteristics on your own. What I plan to do in this lecture is go through the slides and maybe just highlight some of the characteristics. Okay, so that's my plan for this lecture. Okay, so just a couple of real general things to get us going. There are different types of relationship dynamics. Some relationships have more of an element of dependency. In some relationships, there may be maybe one or both or all people are functioning more independently. There's also this relationship dynamic called codependency, which I think we'll be getting into that next week. But what I wanted to point out from the get-go is that in relationships that are considered to be healthy, the dynamic is considered to be interdependent. And with interdependent relationships, one thing that is a characteristic of them is this sense of mutuality, of teamwork, that it's a cooperative type of relationship, that we're in this together. Okay, and so especially in the second video, you'll be seeing more on this concept of mutuality in relationships and how that actually plays out and what it means. So, in general, healthy relationships, they will tend to make us happier and they tend to ease stress. Okay, now that certainly does not mean that we will always feel happier or that we will always experience less stress. But in general, those are two things that are characteristics of healthy relationships. And that alone could be a sort of a guide, just this one characteristic. In healthy relationships, there is sharing of feelings, there's sharing of ideas, opinions, of experiences, there is talking. Um, if there is conflict, the approach to conflict is one, it sometimes gets called fair fighting. A way to describe that might just be, are you most interested in working together towards resolving the conflict? So, are you and the other person fighting against the problem? And sometimes with arguments or conflict, we can get really caught up in wanting to be right or wanting to win. And, you know, with healthy relationships, we're able to let go of that and really work as a team to fight against the problem. Healthy relationships are considered to be realistic and also flexible and adaptable. And this last characteristic is really important in our relationships. We do need to remember ourselves and take good care of ourselves. What sometimes happens in relationships is a tendency um, to forget about ourselves and place all of our attention on the other person or the other people. And so that balanced concern for ourselves and for others is really, really important. Okay, so we're going to get into a more specific list, this long list that I'm going to ask you to be reading on your own with me just highlighting some of the things. But I wanted to tell you that this long list actually comes from a counseling text. And the title of the text is I Never Knew I Had a Choice. I'm not sure that it's still in publication, but it was one of the early texts and was updated for years and years and years and years. Very good text. So these are not my suggestions. These suggestions come from the experts. So as we're going through these characteristics, you might just think about, how do I do in my friendships and in my other relationships with regard to these characteristics? Am I able to do this? And this first one, I do have something highlighted in, I think it's fuchsia. So anyway, because I feel like this is one that I really wanted to explain and talk about. It says each person in the relationship maintains a sense of self-identity. So within the healthy relationships are sometimes get described as one whole person coming together with another whole person, and then this interdependent relationship forms. It is not this idea of a half person gets together with another half person and they complete each other. With healthy relationships, we want to have a fully intact self. We want to know who we are. We want to be able to hang on to that sense of who I am, what I believe, what I enjoy, what's important to me, versus lose ourselves or forget about our own identity and kind of just merge or enmesh with the other person. So, in your friendships, in all of your relationships, are you able to hang on to who you are and stay true to what you believe? Are you able to hang on to your values? Are you able to identify your own thoughts, your own feelings? Those could all be considered a part of self-identity. Okay, and a couple of other things on this first slide. In relationships, it is my responsibility um, to take care of my own happiness. So It's not my friends or my partner or my family's responsibility to make me happy. So, this third characteristic, each person assumes responsibility for his or her own level of happiness. That's a really important thing to also understand. It kind of is reinforcing this feeling of being empowered, or this feeling of being in control of one's own life. Or the analogy I use a lot of times is, I am the person in the driver's seat of my own bus. If somebody else is in the driver's seat of my bus, what's going on. It is my responsibility um, to do things that are going to bring me happiness, to make choices that bring me happiness. It's not other people's responsibility. It's also my responsibility to express my needs, what I might need or want, so other people will be clear about that, versus expecting them to be mind readers. That's not really um, fair. And although we might think that some of those things should be obvious or should just be common sense, um, we don't all have the same ideas about common sense, or what is common to one person may not be common to another. So it's our responsibility to speak up on behalf of ourselves. So this kind of flows with this particular characteristic. Okay, so when we look at this particular slide, um, I think what I'm going to do is just have you be sure and read through these on their own. There's really nothing I'm going to highlight here other than this first characteristic: both individuals are willing to work at keeping their relationship alive. This actually ties into this interdependence, or this concept of mutuality. It isn't one person's job um, to make sure things are going well. Both have to invest in the relationship. And this can be, um, actually, sometimes this plays out in some really basic kinds of basic terms. Something I'm thinking about is when it comes to issuing invitations or creating plans or events. Ideally, what's going to be happening is that both people play a role in that it doesn't just become one person's job. So, and making plans or issuing invitations are a part of keeping a relationship alive. Okay, so this is a pretty packed slide here with, I think, some important things to pay attention to. In healthy relationships, each individual has equal status within the relationship. So, in other words, one person's wants, needs, or opinions isn't considered to be more important than the others. Now, where this may not actually play out, and I think it's understandable, is in our relationships with our elders or our parents, especially when we're still living at home. The power may not be equally shared, or the status may not be exactly equal. But in relationships between adults, um, where you have agreed to participate, in that relationship, there should be um, this sense of equality. Think about decision making. Is the decision making process an equal one? Um, Is there equal attention given to the needs of both people? So there's just a couple of ideas. This is also one that I think is really important to check. Each person finds meaning and sources of nourishment outside of the relationship. And it says friendships outside of the relationship are encouraged. So this is talking more about a partner relationship. Relationships with family and friends are maintained. So, if when you are involved in a close, intimate relationship with a partner, have you or are you still finding that you actually do things outside of the relationship as well? So, are you hanging on to those friendships? Are you staying connected with them? Are you staying connected with family? I have some students sometimes who get confused about this word nourishment. They'll think it just applies to food, that we nourish ourselves with food, and we do. But we also need to nourish our soul, our spirits, our intellect. And so the idea here is that it's kind of recognized that no one person is going to nourish all of those different needs. And so it is really important, even if it's that significant partner, it is really important that you're continuing to do things, explore friendships, explore relationships, explore interests outside of the relationship. Okay. Um, so the other side of this might be it might be I'm no longer exploring interests because I feel like I just need to do whatever the other person does. Or it could be, wow, I've kind of let go of my contacts with my friends because I feel like I just need to spend all of my time with my partner. So, healthy relationship allows for that freedom. Okay. So with this slide, some of these, do apply to, an intimate kind of partner relationship. This first one, if marriage is involved. The second one I like to mention with students, it says each person honors their own needs and the needs of the other for time alone. And I know with the project that I've done when we're face-to-face instruction, I have students select someone to have a conversation with, and they discuss some of these characteristics. And with this particular characteristic, the feedback that I generally get is that this was a helpful thing for them to talk about with their friend, or it could have been a family member, or maybe with their partner, is to open up conversation about this because I think sometimes we are afraid to say no, or to just explain, hey, I don't want to go and do that. I really need to spend some time alone. And that fear, I think, sometimes comes from this place of, I don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. Um, but in a healthy relationship, we should be able to be honest about our needs. And we should also feel as if our needs will be respected by the other and will also be understood by the other. Vice versa, we need to be able to respect others' needs and have understanding for their needs. And this need to spend time alone or just to be with ourselves is, I think all of us experience it. And depending on the degree to which you may be more extroverted or introverted, this need, the degree of this need or the extent of this need will differ. And so, if you are more introverted, the need for alone time or downtime is sometimes a stronger need. And so, in friendships, in all kinds of relationships, we need to get comfortable with expressing this need for time alone. We need to be comfortable enough to be able to say, I just want to spend some time with me. And we also need to accept that need with our friends and any other type of relationship partners. So this one is always very interesting when we've talked about it in class. Each person demonstrates an attitude of flexibility regarding this is traditional sex role behavior. Um, I've seen huge changes over the last, I don't know, 15 years when this topic comes up in class. 15 years ago, I still had probably the majority of students in class saying that, yeah, there are certain things that a male is supposed to do, there are certain things that a female is supposed to do when it comes to friendship or partner type of relationships. As the years have moved along, what happens more often than not is that students are tend to be expressing the idea that all types of behaviors or responsibilities are shared. Um, Child care or taking care of the children isn't just the woman's job. Taking care of the maintenance on cars isn't just the man's job. It isn't just the man's job to financially provide for the family. And these types of roles were considered traditional sex roles. Um, and they evolved out of a society where women still, for the most part, stayed at home, and were responsible for all things related to the care of the home and usually also the care of the children. But, in our society today, that's not really how it works very often. And so those traditional sex roles aren't as much of a fit anymore. Um, you know, the one thing that comes up in class that's always interesting to me is, I'll get these responses from students that say, "Oh no, I don't believe in those traditional sex roles." But when I then ask, "Well, okay, so if you're going out on a date or whatever you want to call it, and it happens to be a male-female date, um, who pays?" Who pays for the meal or who pays for the entertainment, whatever you're doing. And I will still have a fair number of men in the class that say, well, I'm going to pay. And I will still have a fair number of females in the class that say, well, I'm not going to pay. I want the guy to pay. And I usually then say, well, that's interesting because, I'll ask, do both of you work? And both people are working. But the expectation, at least at times, is still asking the male to pay. And in some cases in class, men have been very emphatic about how they want to pay. They don't want the woman to pay. Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways to read into that, and a lot of, there are just some ideas I might have about why it would still be that way. But I think this is really important to examine, at least within ourselves. If I am a guy and I'm insist on paying 100% for everything, what's that about? Um, and, also, is there any expectation tied to that? Does pain maybe make me feel like I'm a little more in control? Um, And it may not be that. It may just be I want to be very generous and kind. Um, but I think this is something that you kind of have to sort out with yourself. Is this the way you really want it to be? With women, I usually ask some questions too. Why is it that you would not want to contribute? Usually, with further questions, I find out that what's going on more often than not is there's this sort of taking turns. One person will pay for one quote date, the next person pays the next time. But what still ends up coming out is, but if it's the first date, the guy should pay. So, it's really interesting. We may think that we've evolved completely beyond these traditional sex roles. And I think that we've made, tremendous progress, in creating more flexibility with these. But there still is, some of that traditional element is still in the mix to some degree. And so this is something that's kind of cool just to think about. This last characteristic too, it says each person does not expect the other to do for them that which they are capable of doing for themselves. This is one that students in the past have gotten confused on also. This does not mean that we don't do favors or do kind things for others. What it's suggesting is that it's probably not a good idea to consistently do something for someone else that they're actually capable of doing themselves. Um, when we consistently do for others, um, we could be doing something that's called enabling. Um, Enabling another person allows them to continue with that habit when it maybe isn't really very healthy for them. So, you might think about and a lot of times when we do stuff like this, it can kind of come back to bite us because it may not bother us at first, but over time, if we're still doing it, and actually they could be doing it on their own, we can become a little frustrated, a little irritated, um, and that can eventually turn into um, feeling resentful, like resenting and angry because you've done all these things. So yeah, so this is another one to think about. And this is our last PowerPoint slide. Um, so this first one is the one that I'll hit on, self-disclosure. And we're talking about here with self-disclosure, sharing feelings. So within healthy relationships, there is comfort there that you can share feelings, share your needs and desires. And then the second part is really important, without fearing negative consequences. So I can share what I like and what I don't like without worrying that something bad will happen. And that something bad happening, it could be something bad within the relationship, or it could be, you know, worrying about something bad happening with yourself or the other person. So this is considered to be an important characteristic of a healthy relationship. This ability to feel comfortable enough to share without worry or without fear. Okay, So, I didn't go over each and every one of these. I hit on some of the ones that I know have been confusing in the past, and also just some of them that I think are maybe really important. All of them are really important. So be sure, and if you weren't able to read through the whole list as I was going through this, look at the PowerPoint. You've got them. And be sure now to watch the second TED Talk prior to the second lecture. All right. Hope you have a good rest of your day.